Morning, everyone. Charles Moscowitz, Monday through Friday, 10 p.m. To midnight Eastern Standard Time. My guest this segment is Dan Kovalik. He is an American lawyer and human rights advocate who currently teaches international human rights at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. Dan is, let me just see here. It would be nice if I could get all my things up and proper. He is the author of The Plot to Scapegoat Russia: How the CIA and the Deep State Have Conspired to Vilify Russia. So, Dan, obviously this is very propitious as we hear stories of Russia invading Ukraine, particularly the eastern provinces of Ukraine, which I don't personally think that the United States has a direct interest in it, because this is predominantly Russian population, and it's a border dispute that probably goes back centuries, maybe even as far back as the Kievan Rus.
Yes,
So, we don't have, I don't think we have a dog in the fight. At the same time, you look at history and we might not have thought we had a dog in the fight when Russia and Germany invaded and divvied up Poland in 1939. So, this could be, it very well, we don't know it's the bigger story, but it could turn out to be a major war. And it certainly seems to be perhaps one of the biggest military conflagrations in Europe, with the possible exception of the breakup of Yugoslavia since World War II. So before we get into the very interesting aspects of your book and a very alternative look at modern history here, which is something that I've never really thought about in those terms, could you and would you comment on today's news with regard to Russia and Ukraine?
Yeah, well, first of all, you raise a lot of issues in your opening remarks. First of all, what's very interesting, you mentioned the break of Yugoslavia and how the US and Germany quickly recognized various republics there, Kosovo, Bosnia, right? And this is very similar to that.
Mm-hmm.
So you have these breakaway republics, Donetsk and Lugansk. Some people pronounce it Luhansk.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2014, right, there was a coup in Ukraine. I think the facts show the U.S. was very instrumental in that coup. And the new government in Kiev was aligned, we know, with neo-Nazis who are still part of the military there, right?
Right.
And the new government in Ukraine, first of all, outlawed Russian as a second language in the schools. And the neo-Nazis that were part of the government declared war on Russians and Jews and gays, and in fact did attack those various groups, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And in reaction, various groups in the Donbass, including these two republics, they declared independence. They said, we don't want this. And
Sure.
they were attacked. They've been attacked. According to a number of very legitimate sources, 14,000 people have died in the Donbass, right, since 2014 as a result of this intra-national conflict. And very early on, these two republics asked Russia to recognize them, and Russia did not. They were very restrained. They were like, well, we're not going to do that because we want a relationship with the West and we don't want to get NATO involved. But finally, in recent days, the European monitoring group that monitors these type of conflicts in one day registered over 1,500 violations of the ceasefire agreements in the Donbass, this eastern part of Ukraine. And, the government, first of all, everyone says Putin, Putin, Putin. His National Assembly, before he decided anything, voted, I think it was like 87% to 13% to recognize these republics.
Right.
And Putin did not bite at that immediately, but he saw what was happening. that Ukraine and its surrogates were launching attacks in the Donbass. And he said, I'm sorry, like, this is ridiculous. And so he, upon the National Assembly's vote, he said, okay, we're going to recognize these republics.
Right.
And
Right.
that's where we're at. But you will never hear this in the mainstream media. You'll never hear about neo-Nazis
Sure.
or the attacks on the Russian-speaking people in this region. But that's where we're at. That's where we're at,
Okay.
Charles.
Although the only thing I might add to this is that the present president of the Ukraine happens to be Jewish. Not that that's, I don't know if I'd call him a neo-Nazi, but
Right.
the coup d'etat was against a government that was leaned in the direction of Russia, but it was the legitimate government of the Ukraine. It was elected, and he was, I forget his name now, but he was the elected head of state, and the coup was backed, I think, by the European Union and NATO, because they wanted to bring Ukraine more into the Western European orbit. They wanted Ukraine to join NATO, which I actually think is a provocation. That would be like Canada joining I don't know, an enemy of the United States. It's kind of right in the heart of Russia. And so I understand Russian interests there, and that they wanted to prevent that. But getting into the interesting presentation of your book, my conventional understanding is that since the Bolshevik Revolution and the communist takeover of the Russian Empire, Russia has been an aggressor. It's been the keystone of an international movement that seeks to subvert and undermine and control all the nations ultimately of the world. And at the same time, I think you are right when you note that the United States had colonial interests, for example, in Latin America. Particularly, this was expressed during the Eisenhower administration, when the Dulles brothers tended to control foreign policy. And so they had a coup d'etat in Guatemala, not because necessarily they were concerned about communist leanings of Arbenz, but because they were protecting United Fruit. So, in a way, it's an interesting and complex aspect that you bring to the story. But having said that, I still do believe that Russia was the footstool of an international communist movement that did intend to subvert the entire planet, no?
Well, it's a very interesting question. Obviously, I'm a Marxist, right? A Marxist and communist, the idea is, of course, to unite all workers around the world, right? So there is a certain idea of proselytizing and bringing other countries into this. At the same time, whatever you say about Stalin, first of all, he defeated Hitler. Okay, we have to acknowledge that the West did play a role in defeating Hitler, but the Soviet Union under Stalin defeated Hitler, right? 85 to 90% of the Germans killed during World War II were killed on the Eastern Front, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And at some point, of course, Stalin did, and it's funny because a lot of leftists criticize Stalin for this. At some point, Stalin decided to have a rapprochement with the West and the world. His view was, if we can protect the Soviet Union, we don't need to spread communism throughout the world, right? We just need to protect, the country that first had communism. So in some ways, after World War II, the Soviet Union was not so much about spreading their own philosophy. At the same time, and this is important, they did support anti-colonial struggles throughout the world, in Latin America, Africa, Asia. And that way they were a progressive force. For example, the most interesting example that very few Americans know about is that the Cubans, intervened in Southern Africa, right? And the Soviet Union supported them at first kind of begrudgingly, because the Cubans decided to do this on their own. And ultimately, Nelson Mandela credited Cuba for helping pave the way for the end of apartheid, right? But the Soviet Union supported that. Meanwhile, the US was supportive of apartheid South Africa almost to the bitter end. So it is a very interesting, history. But the point is the main point is Russia was not an inevitable enemy of the US,
Right.
as the Soviet Union or now, right? So one of the things I point out in my book is after 9/11, the first head of state to call George W. Bush to offer condolences and to offer the help in the war on terror was Vladimir Putin.
Sure. Well, look, I mean, Russia, in a way, I mean, putting aside the issue of the Bolsheviks, was a natural ally of the United States, going all the way back to, John Quincy Adams, who was an ambassador to St. Petersburg. And in the Civil War, it was Russia that sent a flotilla to New York to help protect the Union, because there was a good likelihood that the British and the French were going to throw their side with the Confederacy. So, and I think he did the same thing also as a Russian flotilla in San Francisco for the same reason. So, there is a natural alliance there. I think that was breached with the Bolshevik Revolution, because that was a departure from any kind of norm in the world at that time. I mean, this was the most authoritarian, the most brutal regime in history to take power, and it did things that were, unlike anything that had happened previous, except maybe the brief period in France under the Reign of Terror. And that their opposition to the Nazis was more situational than real, because let's not forget the Hitler-Stalin Pact, which was what started World War II. People need to understand that World War II was started because Germany and Russia divvied up Poland and much of the rest of Eastern Europe. And back then, the left was pro-Nazi, at least implicitly, in that they wanted to keep America out of the war, because that was what Stalin and Hitler wanted.
Yeah, although Charles, can I respond to that?
Yeah.
I don't think that's true. I mean, because you have to go back a little before that. Stalin asked Great Britain and the US to join him in opposing Hitler in 1938, and they said no, because there were people in the US and in the UK who were very happy for the Nazis to go after the Soviet Union and for them to destroy each other, right?
Correct, yes.
And so they would not join him. So then he said, okay, what do I do now? So he didn't join. He signed a peace accord with Hitler to buy him some time. And during that time, he built up his army, he built up the military, and when the Nazis attacked in 1941, he was ready, and he defeated them, and he drove them all the way to Berlin. And I think we can't, understate the role the Soviet Union played in defeating Hitler, in liberating places like Auschwitz. I mean, this was significant, and the partisans in various countries who were supportive of the Soviet Union also fought. There was no better fighters against Hitler than the communist movement. And that's the truth. The Allies didn't get involved in Europe till 1944, right? The Soviet
The United
Union,
States didn't get involved in Europe.
Right. Till
well,
Normandy.
1942, actually.
Well, yeah, but the big invasion was 1944, Normandy, right?
Mm-hmm.
By then, the Soviets have been fighting for 3 years, and they're very proud of this, and that's the other thing. Like, right after the war, everyone knew that the war in Europe was won by the Soviet Union. The U.S. might have won the war in Japan. That's debatable, but whatever. A lot of people said the U.S. won Japan, but the Soviet Union won the war in Europe. But by now, that history has been totally rewritten. And that is so hurtful to the Russians. They're like, what do we do? So my feeling is we have to kind of get real about our relations with these countries. And Russia is not a natural enemy of us. And that's
Right,
my main
especially
point.
since the fall of communism, it's not. But I also would just respond to your comments about Britain and France, and to a degree the United States, not being interested in opposing Nazi Germany, and that, yeah, they thought that let the two massive totalitarian socialist entities duke it out amongst themselves. In fact, Senator Harry Truman, actually,
Harry Truman said that,
yeah,
yes.
he did say that. We don't have a stake there. Let these two monsters, exhaust each other. And I mean, and I understand that. I mean, in a way, the same thing could have been said about World War One. Why did we have a direct say? Our involvement in it might have actually prolonged the war. But the point is that I think that the general American view was that both systems were against American principles of a liberal democracy, and I think to a certain degree the same view was held in Europe, and that one side was not a heck of a lot better or different than the other side. Now, after the war, in a way, we came out of that thing with Nazi Germany defeated, but the Soviet Union victorious. And they then were, in a sense, poised to occupy Eastern Europe, which they did with complete brutality. And
that was agreed to at Yalta. I mean, that was
exactly. Well, that's right. I mean, well, the thing is that that's a whole interesting story, what happened at Yalta. But the point is that Eastern Europe was to be occupied by the Soviet Union against its will, and that the Soviet Union did spearhead subversive communist movements around the world, some of which were very successful, like as in China. So, the war, in a sense, was only over in terms of the defeat of one of the two enemies, the Nazi socialists, but not the defeat of the Soviet socialists, who remained aggressive. And you say they were trying to help liberate third world countries. I don't know about that. I mean, I think that Africa in the 1950s, the United States did not support colonialism in the formal sense. I mean, we did in certain corporations, but those countries would have been better off had they not, been so socialistic. They might have had, they could have been models of genuine progress, like in a way Japan is, or Hong Kong, I suppose, was, or Singapore, instead of becoming socialistic, entities which in a way were colonialized by European ideas as opposed to European armies.
Well, let me say a few things about this. First of all, can we also admit that the US, okay, Nazi Germany was defeated in a way, but you also know about Operation Paperclip. I mean, the US helped internationalize.
Well, that happened on both sides, though, Dan. I mean, the Soviets also grabbed their share of Nazi scientists.
Yeah, but the US brought 1,100 Nazis here, and
Sure,
also
they were scientists.
spread Nazism in countries like Argentina in the 70s, right? We supported fascists there. We supported apartheid South Africa. This is not, some argue that Nazism was not defeated, but it was simply internationalized. The other thing is, look at what the US did in Africa. We killed, with, of course, Belgium, the only independent leader the Congo ever had, right? Patrice Lumumba.
Right?
And it was considered the greatest assassination of the 20th century. Millions of Congolese died as a result of that later. Look at Vietnam. I mean, the U.S. brought this is in the 40s, right after the war. Partnered with Japan. We just defeated Japan, and we partnered with them to recolonize Vietnam. In fact, many American seamen mutinied, saying, "What are we doing? We just defeated these fascists in Japan, and now we're recolonizing Vietnam." And the same thing in Korea. The U.S. played a very, very reactionary role in the world after World War II. But whatever, we shouldn't get too much in the weeds on this history, because we have current history. And the current history happening is there was a coup in Ukraine in 2014. The U.S. supported it, was instrumental in it. it had different elements, but some of them were neo-Nazi, and we have to live with those consequences. And the U.S. has funded those people. In fact, so much that Congressman John Conyers of Detroit passed a resolution saying, oh, we shouldn't fund Nazis in the Ukraine. That was passed and approved and later repealed. Do you remember that? Later, Congress said, oh, I guess we need to support Nazis. So they overturned that act. And we continue to fund a military in Kiev that has these neo-Nazi elements. So you can see Russia's point of view. They lost, well, the Soviet Union and Toto, but mostly Russian, lost 27 million people fighting the Nazis. And now they're looking at these Nazis who are killing Russian speakers in the East, and they're thinking, maybe we shouldn't tolerate this. And I think people need to know that. That's all.
And I think that's a good point. I'm not sure it's so much the neo-Nazi angle, but more the aggressive angle of the European Union and the NATO trying to get a footprint in the middle of, basically almost in the middle of Russia. It's kind of a violation of, regional interests in a way. As I said, it would be like, I don't know, an enemy of the United States grabbing Canada, maybe China.
Or Mexico, right? Well, or Russia. Let's say
That's
Russia
right.
or the Warsaw Pact with troops and missiles in Mexico. That's exactly what they're looking at.
That's right. And I get that. As far as like the post-World War II American involvement in the world, we supported some bad people, and maybe there was some financial interests involved in that. But I think that I view that in the context of the Cold War, in that these same people to varying degrees were involved with putting off enemies who were much worse, as in communist enemies, the kind of people that ran Cuba, for example. These were real thugs. I mean, these are there's no freedom virtually in those governments. They're utopian communists. I mean, they want to transform their people by force. And it was a very toxic movement. So, we supported some people who were maybe, were fascistic. I mean, certainly, Argentina's
Pinochet in Chile, or even before Castro, Batista in Cuba, or Somoza in Nicaragua. Right. I mean, you look at these groups, we were supporting very sweet people.
But if you look at it on an international context, they were standing up against a communist enemy that I would contend, because we can't know by history other than by looking at examples like maybe North Korea or North Vietnam, that would have been a lot worse. Sure, we could have maybe done some things quietly to help maybe bring some reforms in those countries. Pinochet was confronting communists who were coming into that country and just burning and slashing villages and murdering people. It was, he was asked to take that command by former presidents, including Eduardo Frei, who was a Marxist, who was saying, this country is falling apart. We're going right into the Soviet grip here. We have to do something. So he came out of the barracks and he became a dictator. Now, I'm not defending all of his actions, but, the problem is that when you look at it in the context of what was going on in the world at that time, they were still, as bad as they were, I would argue, fending off something much worse. But the contention of your book is in a way quite right, in that this exaggerated fear of Russia, we're not looking at our own sins in a way. I mean, as I said, I read a book about the Dulles brothers. They weren't exactly just only trying to fend off communism, and I think they were, but there were other interests involved that were not necessarily pure. So I get that. It's a very complex story. And I think that, you bring that up maybe from some of your own biases, aren't ones that I share, but you bring up, some of these nuances. So I think that's interesting.
No, and I appreciate that. And again, can I just name the book? I don't know if we have the plot to Scapegoat Russia. I hope people buy it. And it has a new life now because of what's happening in Ukraine. And I'm willing to say that these are very complex issues. But, when you look, say now, the U.S. says, oh, Russia should not recognize these breakaway republics in Ukraine. Meanwhile, the U.S. and Europe was very quick to recognize Kosovo, right, in Bosnia and Yugoslavia, to break South Sudan off of Sudan, right? The U.S. is still occupying 1/3 of Syria against the wishes of not only the government in Damascus, but the people in that 1/3. Like, there is so much hypocrisy here. And yet you hear nothing of this on the mainstream news. They don't talk about occupying Syria or the war in Yemen. The U.S. is supporting, we can agree, a monarchy or dictatorship in Saudi Arabia to attack Yemen. Everyone agrees, the UN, everyone, creating the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. And yet, when do you hear this on the nightly news?
Well, wait a minute.
Absolutely never.
I would only push back in that, yet the civil war in Yemen is, on the one side you have the government backed by the Saudis. On the other side, you have the Houthi tribesmen who are backed by the Iranian mullahs. So
they support them, but the support they give is pretty minimal. I mean, Saudi Arabia is engaged in a fish shoot in Yemen, right? I mean, they are killing thousands, and there are estimates by the UN that millions could die in Yemen due to the siege that's being laid by Saudi Arabia and the US. I mean, it's not comparable. I mean, what's happening there is a one-sided war that the US and UK are supporting Saudi Arabia carrying out. And like, you never hear this on the nightly news.
Okay.
Never.
Fair enough. Although I would note that Iran has been, particularly since we made the mistake of trying to topple Saddam Hussein, which I think created imbalance in that part of the world. Now Iran is very aggressive in terms of controlling Iraq and other portions of Syria and Lebanon, and they're setting up militias that have tens of thousands of missiles on the border of Israel. So, Iran is nothing compared to the old communist Soviet enterprise, which was international, but it is still an aggressor, and it is still trying to export a utopian revolution to countries that maybe would not otherwise want to have that happen. Also, the United States is hypocritical, I think, in terms of complaining about Russia recognizing autonomy for these regions, while at the same time why not recognize autonomy for Tibet or for the Uyghurs or for Hong Kong
or Taiwan, right? Exactly. I mean, the U.S. decides who they're going to recognize, and no one else can recognize. No. But look. In the end, we have to agree. I think we will agree. Whatever's happening in Ukraine, it is not our place to expend blood and treasure on what's happening.
I think we all agree on that.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to have World War III over there, and that it is, we're so concerned with the Russian border of Ukraine, but yet what about our own border right now with Mexico? That's a whole different subject. We probably shouldn't go there, but
right. Fair enough.
But anyways, you bring up nuance on the issue. I still view this in the context of a Cold War struggle between communism and freedom, and and that I don't think that the communist movement of the Soviets was all that worse than the Nazi movement. In fact, I think in many ways it was worse in terms of the sheer numbers of people who were killed and who lost their freedom. And of course, it was around a lot longer. I mean, so we have to put that into context. But anyways, those are my thoughts on it.
Well, look, and I think we agree on some things, disagree on others. But again, the main thing is, and this is the important thing, that we cannot get involved in another war, right? That's gonna.
Well, why do we have the Biden administration, though, shaking a saber And yet they're not really going. I don't think they're really going to get involved in a war. I mean, I think that we're operating from a position of weakness if we do. I also don't think this whole thing would have happened had Donald Trump been serving his second term.
Well,
Because
no, again, he wanted a rapprochement with Russia, which I think was the one thing I supported Trump doing.
Yeah.
And he was mout on it because of Russiagate, which was a hoax in my book.
okay,
Plot
good.
to scapegoat Russia. I talk about that. That was
Yeah.
nonsense.
It's kind of almost like a neo-red bait, like
of course it
we
was,
used to
right?
hear about a red under every bed. Now all of a sudden, Russia,
Of course.
Trump is a Russian spy. I mean, it's
Yeah.
kind of like a very strange phenomena. So yeah,
the
that's
Russians are coming
Ruskies are
again
coming,
and
yeah.
again and again. Right, exactly.
Yeah, so yeah, but I think that this administration is operating from a position of weakness, which is why there was a very, very horrendous and sloppy withdrawal from Afghanistan. It could have been done a little bit more carefully. And now you have Russia. Who knows who's next? Maybe China attacking Taiwan. There's Israel apparently is getting ready for war. I mean, the world is a much less stable place now because the United States is not operating from a position of strength. And we don't have a sense of a government in place that has legitimacy and strength right now. And I think that has created instability and weakness all over the world.
And also, I think, well, I mean, my view is we have a government that is not operating from a point of rationality, right? All these wars we fought were not wars of necessity. They were wars of choice. And we need to stop choosing war. That's my view. We need to stop choosing war, start spending money on our own people. I'm in Pittsburgh. We just had a major bridge collapse. Like, let's build some bridges. Let's keep bridges built. Let's build speed trains in our own country. Let's not, spend all of our resources on these wars of choice, right?
I agree with you on this one. I might come at it from a different place. My position as a conservative is more fundamental as opposed to situational, which is maybe a more left view. But I think this country has been involved in needless wars since World War I. We have, I think it was Charles Austin Beard, the historian, wrote the book called Perpetual War for Perpetual Peace in the 1920s, which described the American policy since that time, which is being perpetually involved with foreign adventures and nation building all over the world, what Washington warned us about in his farewell address. So, yeah, I mean, I think that this has been the policy. I think that it's driven by multinational corp. I mean, here I'm sounding like a leftist, right? Multinational corporations and arms dealers and sort of an internationalist, globalist elite that benefits from keeping the world in a state of confusion and imbalance and instability. And it's not serving us right. Trump was advocated that. I think it's a lot of reasons why they try to take him out. He didn't want to have another war. And now we're back to the old policy of perpetual war for perpetual peace. It's like the administration is out looking for a war. And they're bellicose. They're trying to ratchet it up.
I agree. And by the way, when you were saying, I sound like a leftist, actually you sounded like a guy named Dwight D. Eisenhower. He warned of the military industrial complex, right?
That's right.
And that's what you're talking about. And we know that Raytheon and Lockheed Martin have been saying, this crisis is great for us.
Sure.
And their profits are up and their stocks are up. So look, there's plenty of conservatives who have been saying this. And I agree with those people. Yeah.
Although I think that these same international corporatists who are not particularly loyal to any one sovereign nation, they have an unholy alliance with the globalists who are on the left. But you and I who believe in this transformation of the world, and that nation states are anachronisms and old-fashioned, and that we need to move towards some sort of a world entity. Let's put it that way.
Well, in any case, I think we have a lot of things we agree on. So.
Absolutely. So, Dan, where can people get your book?
So it is The Plot to Scapegoat Russia. Get it on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, and at a bookstore near you. If they don't have it, ask them to order for you.
Exactly. And I hope you do well with it. Hope you get lots of dough.
Thank you, Charles.
We should talk maybe in the future about some of your philosophy. I'd be interested in exploring that, but we can do that in another time.
I would like that very much.
Very good. All right.
You're a mensch, and I appreciate you. Mazel
All right,
tov.
Dan.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
my
you.
friend. Okay.
All right. Take care. Have a good night.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Charles.
You're welcome. Have
That
a
was
good night.
fun.